The afternoon sun hung low over Fairview Plaza, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. The parking lot smelled like fresh-cut grass and warm asphalt. That familiar scent of suburban summers when school lets out and parents finally breathe easy. It was the kind of day where nothing sharp ever happened. Lieutenant Commander Sienna Maddox stepped out of the dry cleaners with a folded uniform, bag draped over her shoulder, and her son's hoodie clutched in her other hand. She wore simple cargo pants, a faded navy blue t-shirt tucked at the waist, and mirrored sunglasses that did most of the talking for her. Nothing about her screamed authority. Nothing about her demanded attention. She moved through the world like water through stone quiet. Steady, unnoticed. Her son Theo skipped 2 steps ahead. A soccer ball tucked under his arm and grass stains smudged across his shins like badges of honor. He was 10 years old, all energy and questions, and a kind of curiosity that made her heart ache in the best way. "You said we could get a smoothie after," he called, over his shoulder without slowing down. "You say that like I forgot," Sienna replied, catching up with a half smile. "But you also said you wouldn't slide tackle during recess today." Theo turned, grinning wide. It wasn't a real slide, just a controlled deceleration. That's not a word a 10-year-old should use after falling on concrete. He laughed, and the sound echoed across the nearly empty lot. Sienna felt something warm settle in her chest. These moments, these simple, unremarkable moments, were the ones she had fought so hard to protect. The years of deployments, the missions she could never speak about, the nights spent in hostile terrain with nothing but her training and her team, all of it had been for this. For him. For the chance to walk her son home from practice and argue about smoothies. They crossed toward the corner shop, passing a line of parked cars and a couple of teenage skateboarders weaving between cart returns. The rhythm of the plaza was slow and drifting, the kind of pace every military-adjacent suburb settled into between 4 in the afternoon and dinner. Nothing urgent. Nothing dangerous. And yet, without seeming to look, Sienna's eyes swept the area. Her pace adjusted a fraction as they moved between shadow and sunlight. She noted the skateboarders. Noticed the van with blackout tint still running near the end of the lot. Noticed the man arguing on speakerphone 3 stores down. And just as quickly, she dismissed each one with the calm discipline of muscle memory. Theo didn't notice. He was mid-sentence about his school science fair when he paused to adjust the laces on his sneaker. Sienna instinctively reached out, guiding him back toward her side. Nothing dramatic. Just protective placement. Subtle. Constant. Like she was always tracking vectors. Even in peacetime. The smoothie shop door was propped open with a painted rock. A chalkboard sign advertised a mango special with 2 May exclamation points. Inside, 3 families waited ahead of them. A girl in braces asked for oat milk. A father in uniform gave his toddler the last sip of strawberry banana. "They'll grab a table by the window," Sienna said, brushing Theo's shoulder gently. He took off toward the corner booth. She stayed behind to order as she waited in line. A voice caught her attention. Sharp, dismissive, young. "Move it, lady." Sienna shifted to the side calmly, not responding. Just enough to let 2 young men, early 20s. Baseball caps pulled low, walk past with swagger and cheap cologne. They didn't look at her again, but one of them muttered something under his breath, followed by a short laugh. She didn't react, didn't even blink, but she did glance toward her son at the booth. Still smiling, still safe. Sienna turned back toward the counter and waited because this afternoon was supposed to be normal. But something in her gut had just shifted. And if there was one thing she had learned in years of combat, convoy rides and hostile terrain, it was the difference between noise and threat. This was not noise. Outside the smoothie shop, The sun had dropped just enough to sharpen shadows beneath the awnings and make everyone squint as they stepped out. Sienna held both drinks, one mango strawberry, one plain banana with oat milk, and was scanning the sidewalk when she saw Theo standing by the corner of the plaza. Back pressed against the brick wall, clutching the soccer ball tighter than usual. Her heart didn't race. It never did. But her focus sharpened like a blade. She moved fast, but not rushed. Training didn't allow for panic. As she approached, she heard it. "Hey, tough guy," one of them was saying. "You think being a little mama's boy gets you out of saying, 'Excuse me'?" Two young men stood between Theo and the rest of the sidewalk. Both were in their early 20s, baggy hoodies, mirrored sunglasses, sneakers too clean to have ever touched gravel. Not in uniform. Not local either, judging by the accent, but full of something close to a dare. Sienna stepped forward, placed the smoothies on the concrete bench beside the planter box, and inserted herself between her son and the two men without saying a word. Theo didn't speak, but his eyes locked on hers, searching for something: reassurance, direction, permission to be afraid. She didn't kneel, didn't hug him, just placed one hand lightly on his shoulder, anchoring him. The taller of the two men leaned his weight from one foot to the other, smirking like this was entertainment. "We just said watch it, lady. Your kid nearly rolled into us like a stray." Sienna spoke calmly, her voice as level as still water. "He's 10. You're 20. Adjust your posture accordingly." The second man, wiry and shorter, laughed like it was a bar joke. "Oh, now she's giving orders." Sienna didn't move. "No, I'm giving you an out." They looked at each other, half smirking, then glanced at Theo, who still hadn't moved. The tall one tilted his head. "Kid looks scared." "He's not," she replied. "But he's about to learn what a bad decision looks like from 6 feet away." The shorter one stepped forward. Not with purpose, but with the swagger of someone used to bluffing his way through life. "Or what? You gonna call your husband?" Sienna's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "He doesn't take these calls anymore," she said quietly. "But I do." That made them pause. Half a beat. Maybe less, but that was the danger with cowards who performed confidence. They often couldn't tell when the tide turned until it was pulling them under. The tall one scoffed and turned to Theo. "Maybe next time you say sorry, kid." He reached forward. Maybe to pat his head. Maybe to tap the ball. That was the first time Theo flinched. Sienna stepped between the hand and her son so fast that the man barely registered it. "Back off," she said flatly. The shift was microscopic, only posture. Her shoulders squared. Her head tilted 5 degrees to the left. Her heels aligned beneath her like a platform. But it was enough for someone watching. An older man sitting near the bakery had been observing since the beginning. He wore a faded Marine Corps t-shirt and a silver watch that caught the light. He put down his coffee slowly, his eyes narrowing. The two men didn't move yet. They were still playing. Theo looked up. "Mom?" Sienna didn't look down, didn't break eye contact with the men in front of her. "Stand behind me," she said. Not loud, not angry, just final. And in that moment, the balance of the street changed, the crowd gathering. At the edges didn't know why, but the men were about to find out. The plaza had gone quiet in the way public places do when something tense begins to take shape, but no one knows how it will end. A stroller wheel squeaked somewhere behind the smoothie shop. A shopping cart clanged against the curb. Even the skateboarders had stopped, boards tipped on their sides. Eyes half fixed on the slow-moving confrontation, the taller man shifted his weight. Amused now, emboldened by the still attention gathering at the edges of the sidewalk. He angled his chin downward, looking at Sienna the way men sometimes look at women they've already decided are beneath them. "You know what your problem is?" he said, stepping closer. You think standing there makes you tough, but you're just some mom in a parking lot. Sienna didn't move, didn't blink. And you're just some boy in a man's body, she replied. We all have our limitations. The shorter one snorted. She's got a mouth on her. I do, Sienna said, and I'm choosing to use it instead of my hands. You should be grateful. The taller man's smirk faltered for just a moment. Something in her tone, something in the way she stood, didn't match the picture he'd built in his head. But pride was a stubborn thing, and he had an audience now. Grateful? He laughed, but it came out hollow. Lady, you don't scare me. I'm not trying to scare you, she said. I'm trying to give you a chance to walk away. He didn't take it. Instead, he stepped forward and shoved her shoulder. Hard. Hard enough that she had to plant her back foot to stay upright. Hard enough that the crowd gasped. Theo cried out, clutching her side. Mom! Sienna didn't retaliate. She absorbed the impact, steadied herself, and kept her eyes locked on the man in front of her. That was your second mistake, she said quietly. The shorter one laughed nervously. What was the first? Thinking I'd let there be a third. The taller man's face twisted into something ugly. He didn't like being talked to this way. Didn't like the calm in her voice, the stillness in her body. The way she made him feel small without raising a hand. So he did what small men do. When they feel cornered, he slapped her. The sound cracked across the plaza like a gunshot. Sienna's head turned with the impact, her cheek stinging, her sunglasses knocked sideways on her face. The crowd went silent. Completely, utterly silent. Theo's voice broke through, trembling. Mom, are you okay? Sienna reached up slowly and removed her sunglasses. She folded them carefully and slipped them into her pocket. When she looked up again, her eyes were steady, clear, unbroken. The man who had struck her was grinning now, feeding off the shock around him. Not so tough now, huh? Sienna took a breath, let it out slowly. Then she spoke 2 words to her son without looking away from the men in front of her. Stand back. Theo stepped behind her, his small hands gripping the back of her shirt, and for the first time, the taller man noticed something in her stance that made his grin falter. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even afraid. She was waiting. The silence that followed lasted no more than 3 seconds, but it stretched across the plaza like a held breath. The taller man's grin had frozen on his face, caught somewhere between triumph and uncertainty. His partner shifted uneasily beside him, suddenly aware that the energy had changed. Sienna stood perfectly still. Her posture had shifted almost imperceptibly, feet shoulder width apart, weight balanced on the balls of her feet, hands loose at her sides. To anyone untrained, she looked calm, almost passive. But the older man in the Marine Corps t-shirt had risen from his seat. He recognized that stance. He'd seen it before in barracks and briefing rooms, in the moments before everything went sideways. Son, he muttered under his breath, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. The taller man didn't hear him. He was too busy enjoying his moment, too drunk on the power of having struck a woman in public without consequence. What's the matter? He taunted. Nothing left to say? Sienna's voice came out steady, almost soft. I gave you chances. I gave you warnings. I let you push me. I let you mock my son. I even let you hit me. She paused. That's done now. The shorter man grabbed his friend's arm. Bro, maybe we should. Shut up, the taller one snapped. He turned back to Sienna, stepping forward again. You think you can do something about it? Go ahead. Try. He reached for her. What happened next took less than 4 seconds. Sienna moved like water finding its path downhill fluid. Inevitable. Precise. She didn't punch. She didn't kick. She redirected. The man's reaching arm became his undoing as she stepped inside his guard, caught his wrist, and used his own momentum to spin him off balance. Before he could register what was happening, his feet left the ground. He landed hard on his back, the impact driving the air from his lungs. His head bounced once against the concrete, not enough to cause serious damage, but enough to make stars explode behind his eyes. The shorter man lunged forward instinctively, but Sienna was already turning. She caught his lead foot with hers, swept his legs, and guided him down with a controlled push that sent him sprawling beside his friend. Neither blow, neither strike. Just physics, leverage, and years of training that most people never knew existed. The entire exchange had been nearly silent. Sienna stepped back, creating distance, her breathing unchanged. She looked down at the two men groaning on the ground, then turned to check on Theodot. He stood frozen behind her, eyes wide, soccer ball forgotten at his feet. "You okay?" she asked softly. He nodded slowly, unable to speak. Sienna turned back toward the men. The taller one was trying to push himself up, his face contorted with pain and confusion. "What the?" he gasped. "What the hell are you?" The Marine had crossed the sidewalk now, standing at the edge of the scene with his arms folded. A slight smile played at the corner of his mouth. "She's a SEAL, son," he said quietly. "Navy Special Warfare. And you just learned why they call it the Silent Service." The man on the ground stared up at Sienna, disbelief washing over his face. She didn't gloat, didn't lecture. She simply looked at him with the same calm she'd carried throughout. "Stay down," she said. "Think about what you've learned, and pray this is the last lesson you ever need." The two men stayed on the ground, not because they couldn't move, but because something in Sienna's eyes told them moving would be unwise. The taller one's chest heaved as he tried to process what had just happened. 4 seconds ago, he'd been in control. Now he was staring up at a woman half his size who hadn't even broken a sweat. The crowd had grown. People emerged from stores, paused on sidewalks, phones in hand but not recording, just watching. There was something in the air that demanded silence, a shared understanding that they were witnessing something rare. The Marine stepped closer, positioning himself between the downed men and any possible escape route. Not that they seemed inclined to run. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked, his voice carrying the gravel of decades of service. Sienna nodded once. "Fine, thank you." "Marcus Webb," he said. "Retired gunnery sergeant. 22 years. Sienna Maddox. Lieutenant commander. Also retired." She paused. "Mostly." Marcus's eyebrows lifted slightly, a gesture of respect. "SEAL teams? Special Operations Group?" He let out a low whistle. "Well, that explains a few things." The shorter man on the ground groaned, trying to sit up. "This is assault," he managed. "You can't just—" "Son," Marcus interrupted. "You touched her child. You shoved her. Your friend slapped her in front of 24 witnesses." She responded with exactly enough force to end the threat without causing permanent damage. He crouched down, his voice dropping. "In any court in this country, that's called restraint. Be grateful she has it." The man's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Theo had moved forward now, standing just behind his mother, his small hand reaching out to grip the hem of her shirt. Sienna felt his fingers trembling slightly and turned to face him. "Hey," she said softly, kneeling so their eyes were level. "You did good. You stayed calm. You listened. I'm proud of you." His lip quivered. "I was scared." "I know. That's okay. Being scared doesn't make you weak. Panicking does. And you didn't panic." He nodded slowly, then looked past her to the men still sitting on the ground. "Why didn't you hit them back right away? When he pushed you? When he hit your face?" Sienna considered the question carefully. This was the moment that mattered, not the confrontation, not the takedown, but this. The lesson her son would carry forward. Because I wanted you to see the difference, she said, between someone who reacts and someone who responds. I could have dropped him the second he touched me. But then you would have learned that strength means striking first, striking fast, striking hard. Isn't that what strength is? No, baby. That's what violence is. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Real strength is knowing you can destroy someone and choosing not to. Until there's no other choice. Real strength is protecting what matters without becoming what you're protecting against. Theo absorbed this, his young mind working through concepts most adults never grasped. So you weren't trying to win, he said slowly. Sienna smiled, the first real smile since the confrontation began. No, I was trying to teach. Behind them, Marcus nodded to himself. He'd heard a lot of things in his years of service. Speeches, commands, briefings. But rarely had he heard wisdom delivered so simply. The sound of a siren in the distance broke the moment. Someone had called the police. The police cruiser pulled into the plaza with lights flashing but no siren. Tires crunching slowly over the red brick entrance. It wasn't called by Sienna, nor by any member of the gathered crowd. Just a clerk from the neighboring pharmacy who had seen the shove, heard the slap, and decided to call it in without waiting to see how it ended. 2 officers stepped out. Standard suburban precinct blues, 1 male, 1 female. Alert but not aggressive. Their eyes scanned the area, moving first toward the 2 men still sitting on the curb, then toward Sienna standing calmly beside her son. What happened here? The male officer asked, his hand resting casually near his radio. Sienna didn't answer first. Marcus stepped forward. Ma'am de-escalated a situation, he said, gesturing toward the down pair. These 2 made contact with her son. She stepped in. They escalated. She responded precisely. The female officer looked from him to Sienna. You're the one who was struck. Sienna gave a single nod. Any injuries? No. The taller man on the ground grunted, still rubbing his shoulder. She threw me on concrete. Marcus laughed softly. No, son. You threw yourself. She just let gravity finish the job. The officers exchanged a glance, then approached Sienna and Theo with measured steps. Ma'am, we'll need your name for the record, the female officer said gently. Witnesses have already confirmed you didn't provoke anything, but procedure is procedure. Sienna produced her ID without a word and handed it over. The officer glanced down, and her eyebrows lifted slightly. Lieutenant Commander? She asked. Retired. Active Special Operations Group? Local resident, on-base housing. The male officer blinked. You're a Navy SEAL? Sienna nodded once. Former. Both officers looked at each other, then back at the men on the curb. The wiry one tried to speak, his voice cracking with indignation. She didn't say that up front. Shouldn't have needed to, Marcus muttered behind them. The officers moved methodically now. Statements were taken. Several bystanders stepped forward, offering brief but unified summaries of what had happened. No exaggeration, just facts. She warned them. Gave them multiple chances. They touched her son. First, she didn't start anything. One woman, a young mother, with a toddler on her hip-handed, over a video file already sent to her phone. Got the whole thing. The shove, the slap, everything. The male officer reviewed the footage briefly, then turned back toward Sienna as the scene settled. Ma'am, do you wish to press charges? Sienna looked down at Theo. His eyes had steadied, the earlier fear replaced by something deeper. Understanding she looked back at the officer. No, she said. I don't need them charged. I need them to remember. The officers paused. Then the female one nodded slowly. Understood. Theo tugged at his mother's shirt, his voice small. Why not, Mom? They hurt you. Sienna knelt for the first time all afternoon, one knee on the pavement, eyes level with her son. Because if they ever try this again, she said softly, with someone who can't stop them, there won't be a lesson left to learn. Theo nodded slowly. Processing. She stood again, tall and composed. Untouched by the chaos she had just navigated, the taller man looked up at her now. Not angry, not defensive, just aware. For the first time that day, he seemed to recognize who he had been dealing with. And for the first time, he looked ashamed. The officers walked the two men toward the cruiser, not in handcuffs, but with a silence that didn't need steel to feel like consequence. They moved with their heads down, shoulders slumped. The bravado that had defined them just minutes ago completely evaporated. The taller one paused at the car door and turned back toward Sienna. For a moment, it looked like he might say something, an apology, an excuse, a justification. But when his eyes met hers, the words died in his throat. There was no anger in her gaze, no triumph, just a steady, quiet certainty that said more than any speech could have delivered. He looked away first. The cruiser pulled out slowly, and with it went the last remnants of tension that had gripped the plaza. Marcus approached Sienna, reaching into his back pocket and producing a folded slip of paper. What's this? She asked. Local Veteran Resource Council, he said. We do community outreach, youth programs, mentorship, that kind of thing. He paused, his weathered face softening. If you ever want to speak at the schools or work with some kids who could use a role model like you, we'd be proud to have you. Sienna accepted the paper with a nod. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking. Marcus started to turn away, then stopped. For what it's worth, ma'am, I've seen a lot of people handle situations like that. Never seen anyone do it better. What you showed your boy today, ... That's going to stick with him forever. Sienna glanced at Theo, who was picking up his soccer ball from where it had rolled against the planter box. That was the point. The small crowd had begun to disperse naturally, like a tide pulling back after a surge. No one clapped. No one cheered. But no one forgot either. They drifted back to their cars, their errands, their ordinary lives, carrying with them the memory of something extraordinary. An older woman with silver hair and kind eyes stopped briefly in front of Sienna. Thank you, she said simply. My grandson was watching. He needed to see that. See what? Sienna asked. That strength doesn't have to be loud. That standing up doesn't mean tearing down. The woman smiled. That there are still people in this world worth believing in. She walked away before Sienna could respond. Theo returned to his mother's side, the soccer ball tucked under his arm again. He looked up at her with eyes that seemed older than they had been an hour ago. Mom? Yeah, baby. Were you scared? Even a little? Sienna considered the question. She could have lied, told him she was fearless, invincible, untouchable. The lies weren't lessons. I was worried, she admitted. Worried about you. Worried about what you might see. Worried about making a mistake, but you didn't make a mistake. No, because I had something to protect. She reached down and ruffled his hair gently. You make me braver than I'd ever be alone. Theo smiled, the first real smile since the confrontation began. It was small, but it was genuine. And in that moment, Sienna knew that everything she had done, everything she had become, had been worth it. For this boy. For this moment. For this chance to show him what it meant to be strong without being cruel, powerful without being proud. The plaza had returned to its normal hum now, only quieter somehow. More thoughtful. Because everyone who had been there had witnessed something. Rare. Not force. Not revenge. Control. The plaza had mostly emptied by the time Sienna and Theo began walking toward the car. No one stopped them. No one asked questions. And yet every passerby offered a subtle nod, one of those rare acknowledgments between strangers who had just witnessed something they didn't quite have words for. Theo stayed close at her side, holding his smoothie in one hand, soccer ball tucked under the other arm. His walk was slower now, not tired, not scared, just thoughtful. They didn't talk at first. Sienna didn't mind the silence. She never had. She walked the way she had learned to move through the world, measured, alert, present. Theo finally broke the quiet. Why didn't you tell me before? She didn't ask what he meant. She knew. That you were a SEAL? She said. He nodded. Or that you could do all that, the fighting, the calm, everything. She gave a faint smile without looking down. Because it's not who I am all the time. It's just what I've trained to do when it's necessary. But that guy hit you. I've been hit before. Didn't it make you mad? Sienna took a breath, then answered carefully. It made me alert. That's not the same as angry. Theo looked down at his feet, processing. I thought you'd hit him back right away. I could have, she said. But then he wouldn't have learned anything. And neither would you. He looked up at her, his eyes clearer than they'd been all day. You weren't trying to win. No, she said. I was trying to show you what not to become. They reached the car, and Sienna unlocked it with a chirp of the fob. She opened the back door for him, waited as he slid in, then handed him the last of the napkins from her pocket. He wiped his hands, then leaned forward as she started to close the door. Mom? Yeah? Are you going to tell anyone? About what happened? She paused, one hand on the door handle. No, she said. But I think they already did. The smile that crossed his face wasn't wide. But it was the kind that lasted, because for the first time in his life, he understood something most people don't learn until much later. His mother wasn't just the one who packed his lunches, signed his permission slips, and told him to wear his helmet. She was someone people underestimated once and never again. Sienna slid into the driver's seat, checked the mirror, and started the engine. As they pulled out of the plaza, the last thing she saw was Marcus still standing outside the bakery, watching them leave. He didn't wave. But he nodded once. So did she. And then she drove on. The sun had dipped below the roofline now, casting long shadows across the familiar streets that led toward home. Theo was quiet in the back seat, but it wasn't the silence of fear or confusion anymore. It was the silence of a boy who was growing up learning that the world was more complicated than he'd imagined, but also more hopeful, because strength wasn't about power. It was about choice. And his mother had shown him exactly what that meant. As they turned onto their street, Theo spoke one more time. Mom? Yeah, baby. Thanks for not letting me be scared alone. Sienna's throat tightened, but her voice stayed steady. Always, she said. And she meant it. Asterisk. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Unbroken Grace Stories community. Where are you watching from?